If you work in advertising, be it digital or anything related, you've probably heard the term programmatic, and specifically programmatic advertising. But what exactly is it, and why is it all of a sudden so important?
This is an AdCoach production. Subscribe and visit adcoach.co for more content.
To start, let's start with the basics. And the basics of programmatic are pretty simple. Programmatic means the automated buying and selling of digital media, digital inventory. So now, I said a couple of things and we need to break them down. So to start with, I said inventory and media. What do I mean by that? Well, think about your phones and your computers, websites, apps. You see ads on them. A banner ad, a video ad. Anytime you see one of those things, it's called an impression. One time an ad unit is served is one impression. Inventory is how many impressions an app or website have to sell. So let's say I have an app, and every month my app gets opened 1 million times. And on every page of my app, I have one available ad unit. My total available inventory is 1 million impressions. So keep that in mind. Now, I also said the automated process of buying and selling. So that kind of implies that there is a non-automated way to do that, which there is. So the first thing we need to understand about that is, what is the traditional way of buying and selling ad inventory? Well, the traditional way is called the I/O process. I/O stands for insertion order. So back to my example of me having an app with 1 million available impressions to sell. Let's say that app is a sports app. I, for one, am a big Buffalo Bills fan, so maybe I have an app around the Buffalo Bills, and I have 1 million impressions per month to sell. Now, an advertiser like Nike might say, we're trying to reach fans of football, and we want to promote our cleats, or shirts, or gear, something related to sports fans. So going to an app like that would be great. So in an insertion order process, what I could do is go to Nike and say, I have 1 million impressions that I could sell you. And I set a price, I sell that to Nike, they give me a contract and say, we're going to pay you, call it $10,000 for your inventory, which is great. I run 1 million ads of Nike on my app. Nike is happy, the contract has expired. Now, that's the traditional setting, but there are a couple of issues with that. One, as an individual who has their own blog about the Buffalo Bills or their own app, Nike is probably not that interested in coming to me. And even if I did have the ability to go to them, that's maybe $10,000 of what potentially be a $100 million advertising budget. So if Nike had to do that one by one to spend all their money, you can imagine it'd be a very long and complicated process. So Nike doesn't go to those small individual apps. Instead, they go to major companies like ESPN, who has similar content, but it's better content, and most importantly, has much more inventory. Whereas I may be only able to sell 1 million impressions, ESPN could sell potentially 1 billion impressions. So Nike would try to put all of their buys into the major players, so that instead of having 1,000 different contracts, maybe they have a dozen or a couple dozen. So that's a traditional I/O process. In a programmatic setting, Nike would automate that. So instead of going to somebody like ESPN or Sports Illustrated, what Nike would want to do is go to a collection of apps. So the biggest collection you may think of would be Google. Google is a big programmatic company. Google has a tool called AdX, that is their exchange. So what an exchange is a collection of these apps. So if I have my Bills blog, my Bills app, instead of trying to go to a Nike, what I would want to do is partner with somebody like a Google who has a collection of apps. And what essentially would happen is Google will give me a piece of code to put into my app. And then every time somebody opens it, that code would fire. It will go to Google, who will then go to their advertisers and say, I have available inventory. Would you like to buy it? Google will have that type of relationship with hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands, potentially millions of different apps all around the world. And they'll start to categorize it. Sports apps, entertainment apps, shopping, video, gaming, etc. So as a Nike-like advertising, as an advertiser like Nike, they could go to somebody like Google and say, I'm looking for football fans. And I don't particularly care where it runs. I want it to be brand safe. I want it to be good content, not inappropriate content. But I don't really care. It doesn't all have to go to ESPN or Sports Illustrated. It can go to the little guys. So what happens is Google says, okay, we'll gather everything together. And every time we see an available ad impression, we'll buy that ad impression in real time. That is called RTB, real-time bidding. So in that process, where somebody opens up my app and it sends a little note to Google to say, hey, there's an available ad inventory here, that entire process happens in less than a second, and it's measured in milliseconds. So in maybe 120 milliseconds, what will happen is a piece of code will send a note to Google and say, I have a user here, and here's where they are. Maybe they're in New York State, maybe it's a male, maybe it's a certain household income, certain age range, and here is the ad size. Give me a bid. And Nike will bid, but Nike may not be the only one bidding. Maybe there's beer advertisers in there, car advertisers, food advertisers. There could be a number of people all bidding for that same potential user. So what will happen is all these advertisers will have preset bids. Nike will say, I'm willing to pay $5 for it. McDonald's may say $5.50, Ford maybe $6, and Bud Light maybe $7. If all of them bid together, Bud Light, being the highest bidder, would win that bid, and their ad would serve instead of Nike. So as an advertiser, there's an advantage there, and that you can get much larger reach, and you can consolidate your buys into one major platform. As a publisher or an app owner, especially smaller ones, you have the ability to sell all of your inventory. In that original example of Nike spending $10,000 with me, well, it sounds great in theory. The reality is that would never happen because, one, Nike wouldn't want to come to me, and two, as a small advertiser, a small publisher, I probably don't have the resources to get into Nike's door and to even pitch them to buy my inventory. So if I wanted to sell all 1 million impressions, it would be very difficult and expensive to the point where it wouldn't even be worth it. So in this situation, Google handles that transaction. They take a small percentage of that, and that percentage is usually anywhere from 10 to 30% of whatever is spent on the inventory. And I, as a publisher, maybe get a little bit less than I would have, but I'm selling my inventory, and I'd rather take a little bit less than nothing at all. Now, beyond that, it gets really complicated with demand-side platforms, SSPs, exchanges, ad networks, agency trading desks, and much, much more. So if you have more questions about that, I recommend going to adcoach.co. The Introduction to Programmatic Advertising class breaks that down in about 2 hours. Also, if you haven't seen a Lumascape, I'm going to put one up on the screen. I recommend you check that out. It really shows how many companies are behind the scenes. It's really easy to call it somebody like Google or Nike or McDonald's or Ford, big major brands, but there are a lot of companies behind the scenes that make up this programmatic space. But again, at the end of the day, we're talking about the automation of buying and selling inventory. And instead of an advertiser going to an individual publisher or app and placing that buy, they now have the ability to place buys across potentially millions of different websites and publishers, all in real time.
If you like this content and want more of it, subscribe to the channel. And if you want full-length educational content on digital advertising courses, visit adcoach.co. That's adcoach.co.